Hello, my name is Bruce Vandal. I'm with Complete College America. And today we are joined by Chad Crumbaker and Jeremy Starkey from West Virginia University, Parkersburg, who did a tremendous presentation at our recent annual convening, focused on how institutions can ensure that the academic pathways that they're building for their students are navigable, and that indeed students who start on a program path with an intention of enrolling in 15 credits a semester and graduating on time are able to do so. That might seem like an easy thing to do at face value, but we know that campuses are challenged by many things related to scheduling, related to facility availability, and other sorts of factors that can impact whether or not a student is actually able to access the courses that they need on their academic map to ensure that they can graduate on time and make progress towards a degree. And so Chad and Jeremy have done some outstanding work. In fact, West Virginia University Parkersburg, I would say, is a model for the country on how to build guided pathway systems, and they've done some excellent work, and I've seen some tremendous results from that. So we're going to have them do their presentation. We'll have a couple of follow-up questions at the end so that you might get some better sense of how this actually unfolded on their campus. But without any further ado, I'm going to toss it to Chad and Jeremy.
All right, welcome. So we are from West Virginia University of Parkersburg, located in Parkersburg, West Virginia. A little bit about our institution. We are a community college that is allowed to offer select four-year degrees. We are the only one in the state of West Virginia that is allowed to do so. So we have academic maps from the certificate level all the way to the baccalaureate level. So, we're going to talk a little bit about, how we got started, how we, measure our growth, some of the results, and how we built the course schedule. So, we had to totally redesign our academic course schedule. Before we looked at redesigning it, we had close to 800 some different sections of courses taught in any particular semester. When we sat down and looked at it, we realized that our students could not register for 12 hours even if they wanted to. One of the most eye-opening activities that we had on campus was during a professional development, we had our faculty sit down with all our newly designed academic maps with the course schedule that was approved through all the faculty, and ask them to schedule a student in their first and second semester courses in their academic map with the schedule that we had in place. Not one student could get their 15 credit hours in the schedule that we currently had. So a little bit of background on how we came to that course schedule. The divisions led it in a siloed system. Each division would take their classes, put it right into the banner system, and nobody would really see it until after it was for public view. Courses would overlap. A student needing an English course and the math course would be at the exact same time on the exact same days. So then, automatically from the get-go, a student could not get the courses that they needed. We had standard start times from almost any minute of every hour of the day. We had classes starting at 7:01, 7:15, 8:05, 8:06, just so that they can make it work for the faculty. And then, all this led to the inability that the student was not able to get the course they need for the sequence or to continue their academic maps.
One of the things these are obviously all points of pain for implementing a redesign, and realistically, everything that happened in terms of scheduling happened at almost at the individual faculty level, and then with the at the divisions by program, and then moving up from there. I mean, at one point we realized we didn't have standard start times at all, because I think we had somewhere like 20 different times you could start classes, not to mention more than that in terms of length of class. And really the biggest issue that resulted from that, and what our professional development activity with our academic maps that Jeremy mentioned, what that did for us was, by showing that group, here are real students, and can they get the necessary courses in their programs. And we figured out that what would happen is you couldn't at all. You might be able to get 6 hours, 9 credit hours in a semester in a path, but the reality would happen is that the students had to reach out into their second, third, fourth semester of their program path in order to find classes that would make them a full-time student.
So we started the guided pathways to success, and put forth, I mean, all the initiatives that are listed. We do highly encourage all of our new students to take math and English in their first semester. We are a co-rec model for math, so all students coming in are automatically in a college level math or English course. They might need a co-rec lab with it, but we are getting that in their first semester. All of our programs have academic maps with semester sequencing. We are striving to be a 15 complete. We had just went through a general ed realignment to make sure that all of our programs at least align that way, and we created flexibility within those gen ed requirements. So this all sounded real great, and we were moving along until we realized that students could not schedule the classes that they needed for their programs of study.
So when we looked at, well, how do we make it work? The first thing, obviously, we already mentioned, you could figure out that we needed standard start time. So we basically went across our schedule and determined, when does it make sense to start classes? For us, we offer classes anywhere from, the typical standard schedule for us went from 8 in the morning till about 9:45 at night. That was our previous schedule. We then looked at being even more broad about it and see how late would it actually make sense for us. While we're a mid-sized area of the country, really late at night isn't really popular for us. So we're not all that metropolitan. So we realize there is some time at night that's too late. But basically, what we did is determine that you couldn't start a class anytime that wasn't on a standard start time. We fished that out. We vetted that through all the academic divisions, all the faculty, to determine when is it that really we need classes or need the start times to be, how long do the class periods need to be. And what we did then was start at 8 in the morning, and basically everything's an hour and 15-minute block from there on. And we did that one semester, starting at 8, 9:30, 11, 12:30, and then went all the way till 10:20. Somehow we ended up at 10:20 at night. Not really sure how that happened, but that's what we did. That first semester had lots of pain actually in it, because there was a lack of flexibility about how long could you run your classes, when should they start, and then to truly avoid overlaps in that case, what we ran into was that you had then blocks of time where students couldn't schedule at all. So after implementing standard start times and saying you must start at this time, we then became more flexible and determined that let's see where we can build in another block of time, or at least where there are classes like lab sciences in particular. But when you look at co-requisites, for us, we call them labs here. When you have co-requisite labs that follow the college course, we need more time than an hour and 15 minutes for just the class, and we needed that extra time built into the day. So in essence, what we determined was our standard start times had to have some flexibility to them, but they had to all start at the same time. They go as long as you want. What we did then after the first semester that was a bit more painful, but it was just a matter of thinking through what we were doing. We determined kind of through some conversations with students, and in particular, they wanted a time in the middle of the day that made sense, like an hour block in essence, where they could have activities. And so what we did was we started in the morning at 8 o'clock. We started again at 9:30, 11, and that 11 o'clock class would end at 12:15. and we added 15 minutes in, or 45 minutes between 12:15 to 1, and really we call it a student engagement time. And what happened as a result of that, which was really nice for our schedule, is that at 1 o'clock then began a new block of schedule for us, which we would have said we had day, evening, and online schedules. What we ended up with was morning, afternoon, and evening schedules. And so in essence, what happened was you could start at 8, you could go at 9:30, and you could go at 11. The really nice thing about 11 o'clock was that 11 o'clock really was a 2-hour block until 1 o'clock, and that handled the science lab problem that most of the time those go about 2 hours. And we ended up then having that morning block being available. And then it started over essentially at 1 o'clock and went until, I think it goes until 5:15 or something like that now, right into 5 o'clock. And then we start our evening at 5:30. The benefit of doing that was that when we schedule it, we can look at true student blocks and say, really, we have a group of students that are morning and we have a group of students of afternoon. And we've determined actually from all this scheduling process that we have less evening students than we really ever realized. So we created this framework. That was really important to be able to build the blocks into it off of the academic maps. So that's where we went, and that's what really is important to the baseline framework of scheduling.
So before we could make all this work, we had data needs. We needed to make sure that we were scheduling the right amount of courses for the right amount of students that we had. So what we did was we looked at the prior year's course enrollment, so that way we can kind of gauge, even though that, W. Parkersburg was on about an 8-year enrollment decline, we at least knew how much of a decline we were on and how much of a decline that we could prepare for. We also looked at the previous semester's course enrollment, but also looked at the student retention and success. So if they were successful in Composition 1, we knew that those students would be, rolling over into Composition 2. Or if they didn't have a successful Composition 1, we needed to make sure that we had enough in that second term of the year so that they could retake it if they needed to. So knowing how many students were enrolled, but also the success and that the students had and how many students were retained were very important. Then we also looked at our new student enrollment coming in. We looked at it, just not the number of new students, but we looked at the number of new students by program so that we could gauge what academic maps was going to take the majority of those students and what students would fill the other ones. We looked at each of the program's current enrollment and their retention, so that way we ensured that even with the program courses that were being scheduled, but also with the Gen Ed courses, making sure that we met the number of sections needed in each Gen Ed area that met the program requirements. And the most probably hardest task and the most convoluted was we looked at every program and every academic map, and then we made a matrix of what all the courses that were needed and then we would look at a specific course and realize how that one course affected how many programs. So, we would see that, English 101, affected about 85% of our programs. The other part of that would have been technical writing. So we understood that when we put an English 101 on the schedule, all the different programs that was impacted. So we really mapped out the entire academic maps by course to ensure that we had everything needed for students to register.
So how did we do this in terms of actually put it together when we had our data needs? So our data needs met. What we figured out, first of all, was that math and English consume the entire schedule, especially when you look at doing them in the first semester, which is what we've done. We went to CoRec, was the model full bore. We went in basically that you have to opt out, or what we sometimes refer to as test out of the co-requisite. You have to have some score. We're an open enrollment institution. You don't have to bring in any score with you whatsoever. You can come here and sign up and take class. So what we figured out was, well, there are some students that brought in ACT, some students would bring in SAT, and they would maybe test out of the co-requisite, but for the most part, all of our students are automatically in English and math with the co-requisites that are associated with them. And there's lots of good reasons for that, as we know. But those classes consume the schedule, because not only are they, for us, our math co-requisites, for instance, are not credit. They're just associated with their college course section. And so what you have in math, let's say you meet 2 days a week for an hour and 15 minutes, you essentially then add another hour onto that twice. So there's 2 more hours a week that have to be covered just by taking a math. In our case, the biggest one is quantitative literacy. You take that class, and really, instead of it looking like a 3 credit hour load, it looks more like a 5 credit hour load when you look at the daily schedule for a student. Don't forget, we also want to make sure we're getting totally to 15 credit hours in real college credits. That's what we're looking for. So math and English, because English is very similar to math, basically there's an extra bunch of time in everyday schedule. So you have to build every student's schedule on the baseline of math and English. Then so that's our tier 1. That's really the core. What we've discovered over time after we talk about tiers 2 and 3, what we've discovered is that you can't really make changes to tier 1 after it's in. If you make that, you've knocked over a bunch of dominoes, and now you can't figure out where to start. So English and math, and getting them on a schedule that works, obviously juggling faculty loads, obviously juggling how many students might take those classes. You have to put all those things, and you got to do that first. That's what's the nice part. If you do that first, is then you can move to tier 2 and look at how to build it over top of that.
Yeah, so tier 2 was coming from that matrix that these were the general ed courses that that fit almost every one of our academic maps. These were courses that no matter what program you signed up for, you were going to need this. You was going to need Intro to Computer Science. You was going to need Fundamentals of Speech. You was going to need science with a lab. And we, with that 11 o'clock block, we realized that was a great time to have labs. Psych and sociology, and then our College 101, which is, Intro to College. So those were the ones that had to be then, once we had English and math on the board, we then had to strategically place these so that a student, no matter if they were morning, afternoon, evening student, could take these with their math and English, and then also with the program, first and second semester program courses that they needed. Then then we went on to tier 3. Tier 3 was all other gen ed strands, those strands that might not touch every one of them, like the art appreciations, the lit. Those were those tier 3 that they were in some programs, but not in all of them. So we had a little bit more leeway on where we put those courses.
So how does it work practically? This is where the technology comes into play. We went to a room on campus that has a really big whiteboard, and we used dry erase markers to start. Basically, what we did is then we charted out every start time, every class block, and we started filling in the gap filling in the board, basically based on the tiers we just talked about. As I already said, because that co-requisite need and the fact that it takes up additional time in your daily schedules, we start with that. We go to tier 2, fill in with tier 3, and then here's the check and balance based on the whole schedule. We go back through and start with the academic maps, and we pretend we're a brand new student on campus, and we go and see, can that student get a schedule? And here's what we did, because we were able to identify that we had morning, afternoon, evening, and online schedules. We were able to go through and look and say, can this student be a morning student? Can this student be an afternoon student, an evening, and online? In some cases, no, they can't be. And there's a good reason for that. And there are certain programs that have 0 evening population or have 0 online population. And so what you learn is there are good reasons why you wouldn't necessarily have each of the 4 types of schedules. That's the check and balance. You go back through and you run through every single program and you determine, can these folks get 15 credit hours based on the academic map? Can they do it? And would it be feasible for them? Can they do it without, being just totally overstressed and overscheduled?
So once we have this, we call it the base schedule fixed. We then send it out to the divisions, each division and their chair and their scheduling committee. They take that base schedule and then they work their program courses within the framework. being mindful that, they cannot change the base schedule. They can't go in there and move an English or math around. They have to get their program-specific course to fit within what is currently in there. And then once they get all of their program courses in there, we have a group of professional advisors that will then sit down with the total course schedule, the base schedule, plus all the program courses built into it. And then they will then, once again, check and balance the course schedule by trying to see, make sure that each student can get 15 credit hours, their first and second terms on their academic map scheduled with our course schedule. So here was the benefits. You'll see a large 76% over there, and we'll get to that here in a second. The immediate impact was, we had efficient course offerings. At the beginning, I said we had close to 800 different sections of courses on our campus before we, built this new course schedule. We got that down to below 600. We was able to trim off 20% of our course offerings. So even though we had a decrease in the course sections, but we actually had an increase in our FTE. Our students were actually taking more courses and more credit hours because they were able to take more credit hours. Our first level math and English success. So before we had this new course schedule and our Corequisite model, our English success was about 60% of all of our students completed a college level English course within their first year. After the Corequisite model and the course schedule model, we are about 85% now complete a college level English course within their first year. And it's really not even the first year, it's first semester because of how the schedule is built. Math. Our math success rate before our Corequisite and our scheduling was at 28%, successfully completed a college level math course within their first year. We are now up to 62% completing a college level math course. And once again, it's in that first semester. We used to have an issue on campus where students were waiting until that last semester that they needed to graduate to take a math course, and then it was not successful, which just prolonged their graduation. We are now seeing it. Our success is up, and what is really important is all these students are coming in taking the college level math course from the very beginning. There is no developmental courses, so not only is the success rate higher, but it's everybody in that population is getting that college level math or English course. And then students, we are inching ever so close to getting our average credit hours to 15. Before our schedule, we were about 11.2 credits attempted per student. After the schedule, we were 14.28. So we are inching ever so close to that 15 credits a semester. But that big 76s are probably our biggest success. Before our guided pathways and all of the things that we've done, all of the initiatives that we've taken on, and before our course schedule, we were right at 50% retention. The first year after we had the schedule and everything else, we're up to 76%. So we are, moving the needle when it comes to retention.
Right, and with retention, I think the guided pathways are so important to that because we have students that are having success along the way. They're meeting the milestones that they need to meet, and it's really improved. The other thing about our schedule that I can't indicate enough is that we actually were able to better identify our students in terms of when they wanted classes. The ones that we actually have, it helped us kind of change in some ways, or at least look at new strategies to look at additional student populations. At one time here, we anecdotally thought we had a lot of evening students, and what we found was that we really didn't, because as we made it more available to have schedules during the day, students took less evening classes. So what was happening is they were bleeding over into the evening because it was the opportunity to take that class during that semester. We had that quite a bit, more than we even wanted to realize. So we certainly had that as a point of eye-opening experience to say, what do we need to do, and do we truly have evening students? And we're still working on how to, attract that group in particular. But we have the schedules for them. We know we can offer them a full load in the evening. But that was a really big benefit, I think, of what we did there.
And another benefit is we did trim our sections, which allowed us to rely less on our adjuncts. We got to be way more selective in the adjuncts that we had coming in teaching our courses, because we didn't need as many doing that, which also led to a cost savings, which then our CFO then turned around and actually gave an increase in the salaries of our adjuncts. So there was some benefits to trimming it down. But it really wasn't trimming it down. It was actually becoming way more efficient on what we taught and how we taught it.
Right sizing our schedule and our faculty loads and everything. That's what we have. We have open for questions at this point.
Jeremy and Chad, tremendous, really exciting stuff. So I have just a couple of questions I'd like to ask that I think folks out there would be really interested in knowing. First of all, let's talk about how long this took for you. How long did the whole process take? What parts took the longest time? Were there parts of it that were maybe not quite as overwhelming as you thought? So talk about the process in terms of what it took and the time it took to finish it.
So I would say the biggest, probably the first hurdle that took the longest was getting academic maps together, because we were in the midst, at the same time we wanted to do that, we had looked at general education and had redesigned that, really looked at it as it related to the flagship school in West Virginia, WVU. So we had to look at them and try to line up our transfer pathways for those folks. Realizing we have a whole bunch of bachelor's degrees here, there are plenty of students that want to transfer also. So we had to work through that and really look at opening our minds to curriculum changes and really looking at looking at program flexibility. At one time, we were so prescriptive about which general education classes that students would have to take in each program that we had almost no room for error, in essence. If I chose I'll just throw random numbers out, but if one program might use a communications class that was 111 and another one would use 112, there was no overlap. And so that meant we had to offer twice as many classes. So to get people to look at, well, does it meet the same general education outcome that we're looking for? Yeah, it's a communication point. So we had to do a lot of work during that point. And there was just a lot of structural pieces in that. Obviously, another big piece was getting the co-requisites down. I mean, we've talked about those other game changers and how those placed a piece together. But having that map and having it understood what it is that we were doing and that there was success that came with implementing co-requisites, those things helped drive us over. And it took about a year to really get that done. And we did in that same year, we did our first version of a redesign of the schedule, which if you remember, I mentioned that that one was probably the most painful schedule we had because one, we changed everything and then we were too inflexible. And then, so we didn't make a lot of friends in that first semester, but we made a lot after that. So basically that was in the spring of one year. So that took us about a year to get the maps right, to get the schedule in place, the first version of it. And by the fall of the next year, we had implemented essentially what we're doing now. Obviously, there are always tweaks. We brought in that next semester, because of the pain of that first one, we brought faculty, division chairs, we brought everybody in to tell us what are the weaknesses here. If we make these little tweaks, sometimes we made people so much happier. I'll give you an example, a glaring example of the worst thing we did in our schedule was somehow we created a biology 101 class that met from 5:30 at night until 10:20 because it was all one night with class and lab. We made a lot of people more happy when we changed that and said, well, that's probably way too much for any person to possibly digest in a single evening of 5 hours. So, but those kinds of things really changed. It was about a year process to get us to where we have a product that people like, that then we can adjust and make small adjustments. And literally this morning we were making some tweaks to our schedule for the next fall. So that was probably the biggest thing. Some of the really buy-in from faculty was, I would say that was probably one of the biggest things that we had to worry about. that one professional development session that we sat down and said, you can't make a schedule, and everybody realized it, started to turn that conversation very strongly in the direction that we wanted to. Other than that, being flexible, and then it's really hard to combat the fact that our retention went a lot higher, and that our success rates in some of the classes that traditionally were the hardest to get through had gone up.
And then faculty know that they can make suggestions or changes to the schedule. All they have to do is explain how it benefits the student. If they can successfully, prove that it helps the student, then the schedule can be changed and altered. So it's putting the student first.
Right. That's a rule that I have in determining whether or not people want to make changes, is how does this benefit student success? And when you think about that, I think when you turn that question back to faculty, then they a lot of times have very good reasons. And so that's the nice part. And to frame the conversation in that way, I think has been extremely helpful on our campus.
So talk to me a little bit more about exactly what you asked faculty to do. How much of this was the lifting you were doing in terms of doing the data collection to understand whether or not students can get through a pathway, versus what you were asking faculty to do, and whether they were involved in the data collection process, or were they mostly involved in sort of developing the solutions around the schedules? Talk about the roles that they played and how they were a partner with you in this process.
So the biggest thing that they did really was they had to trust us we actually put our necks on the line pretty big to get them to trust us to do this kind of without them, because prior to this process, they did it all, and they did it in vacuums without understanding the whole picture. So that was really the first thing that had to happen. I think, so in terms of the groundwork for it, they didn't do a lot of that. That had to happen from an administrative standpoint. But the reality then is the work of understanding what was happening behind the scenes, because trust me, one person, 2 people, 5 people can understand everything that happens on a campus. And having the feedback and it becoming a constructive feedback about how it is that it's impacting students, and framing that conversation and student success, that helped. That was the work that the faculty did. Not to mention that all that they're doing in math and English to get the co-requisites to work and the extremely high success rates is all them. They've done all that work. We just had to put the pieces together to make sure that could be done in the schedule. So they did all the hard work of the curriculum design and things like that, really, as it relates to those things.
So talk to me a little bit about that then. So the curriculum design versus the scheduling. So did you do the scheduling structure first to provide the data to show where the bottlenecks were, and then that then catalyzed the curriculum design? Was this happening in parallel? Talk about that, how that worked together.
So basically, well, when we talk about the co-requisite curriculum design and those things, that actually happened over the course of like at the end of the spring into the summer, and it launched in the fall. So we had, particularly the math faculty, we've actually kind of done co-requisites in English for a while, so it was less of a new direction. Math, that was they did it at a breakneck pace, and then have made tweaks along the way. So that happened kind of right on the beginning end of trying to determine then the program curriculum changes, which was when we went through the maps. So that was really important to the maps, because we had to understand how many credit hours are we asking people to do, what kinds of classes are we asking them to do in their first semester. So the curriculum design kind of just rolled into the end of the math and English co-requisite design. And then the schedule had to be, it has to come after the math. And what we learned more than anything else is that we have to know, when do we expect, as academics, when do we expect people to take classes? While we all know, and this is something that we talk a lot about, is we make assumptions about what students know. Putting them out there and having to sit down and saying, really, we expect you to take these 5 courses before you take these next 5 courses. That was a big part of what faculty had to do to build that together, because without that, it's really hard to make a schedule. You have to know what it is you expect people to do and in what sequence.
Mm-hmm. So the fact is they've already, if you're a campus that already has academic maps in place, it sounds like you've already done a lot of the heavy lifting. And from there, it's just about how to make sure that the pathways are clear for students. So that
Correct.
Okay. All right, I have one more question, and it has to do with students and communicating to students. So you mentioned that in some cases, you weren't able to make sure that a student could get the courses in any one of those blocks, that there was just times where you decided the program necessitated sort of only being able to offer them in certain times. So are you able to then communicate to students much more clearly as they think about a program path, about not only what the program is, but actually when they're going to need to be available to take those courses? So how does that been woven in, and how are you communicating to students now that you want this program, but you want it to be an evening program, but that's just not possible? Or this is when this program's offered. Talk more about communication with students.
Sure. So now that we have the schedule, the schedule's we've probably been through at least 2 academic years with the schedule. Our students are now getting comfortable, and they now know what to expect for the 3rd and 4th semester courses. Because really nothing much is, I don't want to call it a rolling schedule because we just don't roll it over and not put any thought into it. But students now have the idea that what is coming and when it's going to be coming. For example, our education program, it's not an evening program. From the onset, they understand that, they have a morning or afternoon choice, but we can also guarantee that their 3rd and 4th, 5th, 6th semesters is going to be in that same time frame. So they're not going to have to adjust their lifestyle just because we adjust our schedule. When we see that our students are taking the morning schedule, those programs are keeping that, just past the 1st and 2nd semester so that they don't have to do any alteration. So it's actually helped our students know what's coming.
Great. So let's just end on just one last question. So if somebody's viewing this and they're saying, where do I start with this? Just in terms of engaging my campus or starting a process, what's your piece of advice of where to jump in and get started?
I would say the first thing you have to do really is look at taking together what is the curriculum and try to say, hey, here's this student, how would they take these classes? When we put everybody in a room basically and said, try this experiment and see what we get, that was really the biggest eye-opening piece for the campus to understand. There were people who were advisors who knew that was a problem all the time. People that were in the front, they've seen students and said, man, we're grabbing way out into 3rd, 4th, 5th semester to get schedules for students. But when everyone together started to realize, hey, this is a big issue, that was really the turning point to say, we have to make these things make more sense. We've made too many assumptions about what people should know and that they should know their own pathway. And setting the pathway then, that was the next part. Setting that table for them, saying, here's how you get there. We know how to get there, but for some reason, we were locking that up and saying only we're allowed to know it. Telling them and getting that understood was big across the campus. So that's where I would start, is really bring people together and say, how do you make a schedule for students? And really, you're going to see that you'll fail. I think a lot of places probably have that same problem, that it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jeremy and Chad, thank you so much for your time today. This is tremendous. I know that this is going to be a very valuable resource for those out there that are in the midst of this work. And so thank you and good luck and congratulations on a job well done.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.